Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the Batman Telltale series. Now the problem here is because I've really failed to maintain momentum on this game, I don't even remember where I am in the story. Like, we found a bunch of evidence against Falcone and handed it over to Lieutenant Gordon at the moment, which I imagine he'll be promoted, although commissioner is probably pretty far away from a lieutenant rank. Uh, like, you would have to be lieutenant, and then I think sergeant's probably above lieutenant, maybe even a lieutenant sergeant, and then you would have to be captain above that, and then like after captain, then you're probably somewhere around the commissioner. And that felt like that was going to be the end of this episode, and yet it's continuing after that point. So I guess we'll just resume the game. Like, you oddly found out that Catwoman was dating Harvey Dent, and Batman is going after Falcone. See, this is funny because we're seeing Batman with his suit on and rain effects, which is something that just now I imagine that the Telltale engine was programmed to do, as far just now as in when this game was made. And we're seeing kind of a heavy reliance on technology, where Batman always did have like gadgets, but he never really emphasizes on that so much in modern times. That is something kind of more for the older Tim Burton-esque movies, where you have to kind of speed things up. Or you go back to like Batman 66, where the gadgets were really just puns and jokes, like shark spray or something like that. But in modern times, they really try to keep it fairly limited to the Batmobile and the Batarang, and you don't even really see the Batarang used that often in the comics, which is probably a factor of the fact that the comics only have so many panels, so drawing gadgets is not as interesting as drawing people and just having conversations, or action fighting sequences.
Good point of entry.
Seriously? Was that the only thing? There's this like alt here, which I would assume it's the height, and it's just part of set dressing, and not that I can hit the right trigger or the left trigger. Interesting. It felt like the right trigger was actually moving the cursor for a second there, but I guess not. Okay, so I need to be flying this drone on a kind of fixed path. It can go up, it can go down, and it can go to the right. But because you can hold the left trigger to see things that you can click on, it actually isn't. It actually isn't like much of a hidden object experience.
Cameras.
The entire floor is under surveillance. You'll be detected as soon as you enter.
No time for
This is another example of just like background people walking around, which, in all fairness, just did not exist in previous Telltale games.
Nikki, in lockup again? Christ, Kimmy, what did they pinch him for now? Some hit down at the docks. Nikki? No, I didn't think he was a hatchet man. both. Well, does he got an alibi? Honey, I'm always his alibi.
So, I guess that may be a bit of a hint as to the life of being the girlfriend of a criminal, which almost parallels what it would be like for Batman to date Catwoman, which they eventually didn't marry. Selena Kyle. No, actually, it was more Batman married Catwoman more than Bruce Wayne married Selena Kyle. Although you could also look at it, that's the life of Bruce Wayne to Batman. Bruce Wayne is effectively always the alibi to Batman.
Tell me another.
What's the difference between the Mafia and City Council?
I don't know. Aren't they the same thing?
Only one of them is organized.
Ooh. You're cute.
So, you alone?
Not anymore, I'm not.
See, it's kind of funny to potentially have a mob party where everybody's together, and if anything, this is kind of an interesting idealized outcome. You can see these two people are specifically programmed to just walk back and forth, but they do it in a slow enough fashion that you probably wouldn't have noticed. It is kind of like an idealized idea of what a mob really would be. Kind of a movie way of telling that story. Where in reality you really don't get to that solution, or you don't get to that point where people are just like openly having mob parties. I don't think, at least.
Nothing here.
In a lot of ways, this feels like
Falcone's symbol.
this feels a
The red
lot
rose
like
after
the
tonight.
the attempt at an evolution. And I guess this couple just walks between two different pieces of art, of what any old flat point and click adventure would be, where you are in one of those sequences where you're just wandering around clicking on things. But it doesn't really get quite to that point where it makes sense, because you're not really picking up anything. So the only thing you actually have to interact with, I imagine, is this office door.
That's the most heavily guarded door in the building.
Gotta be Falcone's hideout.
Well, it won't be as easy as ringing the doorbell.
4 armed guards. Stealth not an option.
And see, then it just starts this
Put together a
cutscene.
plan of attack. Stand by.
So we're gonna, I guess, try and take out everybody at once.
Couple of options for taking this guy down.
Okay, so now we're doing something different. So I could either link him to the coffee table and hit him with this, or hit him with the privacy screen. Well, with this girl in the way, you're gonna hit the girl, or you're gonna brutalize the guy with a coffee table and potentially hit it. So I guess I'll go with the folding screen, just because I want to see where this really goes with the girl. That may not even be viable. it's a interesting idea, I suppose, to kind of script your actions in a Telltale game. Hmm. And so, what are our options? We can either hit him with the hanging light or the modern arch. Let's go with the modern arch. I mean, can we break the link? I guess we can. I suppose if you just wanted to see every possibility, you could break the links and remake the links. Hmm. Let's go back and
Might be tricky. Any ideas?
I've got it covered out.
then we have some conversation just to see how this will all play out. It really does feel like either way you do this, you're still going to do some really brutal actions. This isn't a terrible thought for a Batman game, because that really is what Batman has always been. It has always been a more scenic experience, and it does kind of make sense to try and make a game where you're not really controlling the character as much as you're just controlling the... Alright, so we can either smash them into stairs or smash them into the pillar. Let's see how the pillar looks. I think we may just look at everything. But I do think this would get fairly annoying if you were doing this back to back. Right, where's the last mobster? Did you take everybody down, and this guy's still gonna just like immediately escape through some escape room? And we've got this last guy, which he'd probably be about the only one you could probably take out fairly stealthily. Balcony railing. Or upper balcony. Let's see what the upper balcony looks like. And then we'll probably do the balcony railing. It's weird to see them...
Bruce, have you formulated your plan of attack?
Oops. I guess you didn't get a choice.
Not yet.
Let's go back to not yet.
Reactivating drone cameras. Ready when you are.
And see, the only reason why that is that way was because there should have just been a button that pops up to say press A when you're done. Okay, well that seems even more violent.
Have you formulated your plan of attack?
Not yet.
Reactivating drone cameras.
Like, you don't need to transition to a different cutscene, particularly here. that you could have just had Alfred ask that question. And there's never more than 2 options, so they still are kind of just doing the bare minimum. This definitely feels like a concept that instead of doing this 4 times in a row, should have been something that you do fairly consistently once, and then you have some conversation, then you do it again. And this was completely missing.
Going in.
Very good, sir.
To
Your turn to crash his party.
at the beginning of the game, like if this is a concept, they squeeze it here at the end of the game because they're not really I guess confident about it. And it's weird at this point to have the quick time events. I think you just pretty much want to lose that. And it's kind of hard to have any sympathy for the other patrons just running in fear when you know they're criminals. And it definitely feels like you're seeing some copy and paste thugs here. Like they all look very similar. It would probably be beneficial, since this feels like a year 1 Batman, if they straight up said the Batsuit was not bulletproof. Because my assumption is that yes, it is bulletproof.
Show yourself. You got no goddamn right to be here.
And that, even with the minimal interface, you still have that bat signal. You still have the bat signal fully glowing in the lower left-hand corner. And that's pretty brutal too, to have Falcone stabbed in the back with a batarang.
Can't sneak up on me.
Yeah, one assumes, I don't know if I actually hit the right buttons there. That's not gonna stop a gun from firing.
You think that's gonna work? I'm gonna light up the
And see, obviously here, this is actually Cobblepot, the Penguin. He's taking down the mayor and the Falcone gangs, so he can take over. See, A and right trigger.
Explosives armed. Fire when ready.
So at this point, you're effectively shooting a gun. And that is a problem certainly with trying to be cool and throw in gadgets more. So you've just violated Batman's core idea.
answers now, or you fall.
See, that's another case where I'd like to know
I found your calling card at the docks.
where you'd really like it to tell you.
wanted to lead you here.
I'd like the dialogue choices to tell you exactly what's going to be said, or at least to have the option to be told exactly what you said. I don't think that's a good idea to tease. tease what's going to be said and then not
Someone
make it clear.
trying to cut me out of the deal, because I did not make that mess at the docks.
Then who did?
No, we're done. Gotham's watching now.
So I guess I could either drop him or not drop him.
Give him a show. I'll be walking free by tomorrow morning.
Arrest Falcone or brutalize Falcone.
What a place to...
They don't even really have 3D models of zip ties. Like,
Spill it, Falcone, while you still can.
It's the Waynes. They're behind all this.
What do you mean?
You want to save this city? Well, the Waynes are the biggest gangsters in Gotham.
seems like we had already
Thanks for
seen
the
them
assist.
kick through the
Now we only
door.
have to take one of you down. Open fire!
So yeah, I assume what's happening here is Oswald Cobblepot is pretending to be a Wayne. But which Wayne I don't know because the parents are dead, so I guess maybe Bruce Wayne?
An alleged mob boss, Carmine Falcone, who was found dangling over a 50-story drop. Bet Falcone loved that view.
See, this is good use of Jack Ryder to kind of wrap up an episode, certainly. And then they're probably giving you something useful in the bottom scroll there, but it's hard to pay attention to that.
This brings me to the story everyone is talking about. The Wayne family. For generations, the big W on the Wayne Enterprises tower was a reassuring
Am I supposed to
sight.
press A?
You knew that there was something pure at the heart of Gotham. That this city, for all its faults, was built by good people. But with Thomas and Martha's shining reputation called into question, we no longer have such assurances. And even
We're talking
worse,
about
it
unemployment
seems
and
that
surveillance
hasn't fallen
laws
far from the tree.
and a
Gotham's
sky rail
greatest
crash
son, Bruce
in the bottom
Wayne,
of the scroll.
seen here in the company of gangsters, may be just as crooked as his parents. In his defense, Wayne fired back saying,
The Wayne family has always been a cornerstone of Gotham. We've never had and never will have connections to organized crime.
in a world where the Waynes, our golden family, are corrupt, who are we left with? Who can Gothamites look up to? The supposed hero Batman? Only time will tell. Meanwhile,
It's kind of funny how the bat suit sometimes has blue glowing eyes.
feeling throughout Gotham is that the Waynes' time in the sun is ending.
And it's not just to indicate that he's using a different scanning mode or something like that.
The suit, the car, this entire cave.
Master Bruce?
Everything I built. I created all of this because I didn't want any more innocent people to die. If Falcone's telling the truth about my parents, then what the hell did we do this for?
Bruce,
What have you been hiding from me? Alfred!
It does certainly play into my idea, certainly that Bruce Wayne has fantastical thinking and has idealized the idea of his parents and made them saints when they were just normal people. But honestly, I seriously doubt we're going to find out, even in this case, that the Waynes were actually gangsters. And even if they were, at a certain point, it's like, what does it matter? If they were gangsters before they died. Maybe that even led up to their death in some way. It would be an interesting twist if like Joe Chill was actually hired to kill them. But any crime they would have committed would have been decades ago. And when you put that next to the symbol of hope that the Wayne's family have been until then, it's just not a good story to even tell for the newspapers. You just kind of cover it up in the same way that in the United States we have like George Washington being a slave owner, and then that's basically covered up, and George Washington is idealized and turned into this near saint-like character instead of just being a rich oligarch of the pre-United States and United States. So yeah, I don't see how this story really helps anything. Plus you're taking the word of Falcone, who very possibly is lying. So our choices were, did you stick up for Harvey in front of Falcone? Almost everybody did, 2/3. And with these Telltale games, that's pretty much how it always goes. That last sequence was great, but frankly, that last sequence definitely shows how you could have made a different type of game versus this Telltale formula, which is just getting very long in the tooth and is really poorly applied to Batman in particular. So maybe going forward we'll see more sequences like that. Even in that case, though, I don't think the QuickTime events are particularly necessary. I would have been kind of happy with just time freezes. You get to pick your choices as it's happening, and then it goes forward. So instead of planning ahead of it, we are having a very bad example of Batman here as far as him being a detective, because if there was any hint or clue of his parents being criminals, he would have had to have some kind of mental block that would have stopped him from actually they're actually crediting Bob Kane and Bill Finger for Batman here, which for a long time I don't think they were crediting Bill Finger for creating Batman, and lawsuits galore had to happen around that. But I could be thinking about a different character actually that happens fairly often in comics. 85% chose to provide a quote for Vicky's story, which is pretty obvious. Interestingly, nearly half of the players did choose to break the arm of the bad guy, which, yeah, that seemed like an incredibly brutal sequence, but there's been a lot of brutal sequences here. Nearly 3/4 of people gave the information to Lieutenant Gordon instead of Vicky Vale. And nearly all players showed restraint, which inevitably what we're going to run into is there's going to be accusations that Batman is working with Bruce Wayne. And I wouldn't even be surprised if Bruce Wayne gets demasked in this first season even. And so if you had killed Falcone, or tried to kill Falcone, it would have just made Bruce Wayne look even more corrupt. Yeah, there really is a logical dissonance here to the idea that you're going to be able to make Bruce Wayne look like he's a mobster, because there's zero evidence of that. And I feel like the statute of limitations of nearly any crime, I mean, here's the thing they're not paying any attention to. Assuming Gotham is in the United States and the United States is anywhere close to the real world United States, then you have a constitutional right to face your accuser, which creates an interesting loophole that if you're dead, you cannot be convicted of a crime. Unfortunately, there are some other interesting loopholes where money could be confiscated if you're and your money can be accused of committing a crime, which is just some kind of ridiculous asset forfeiture garbage, but it does happen. So even if the Wayne family, if the Bruce Wayne's parents had straight up just murdered people, like the biggest crime with no statute of limitations on it, they're already dead. They can't be convicted of that. Their family fortune, which would have been inherited to Bruce Wayne when they died, I think probably if you were going to lay any claim towards that fortune as far as criminal activity or asset forfeiture, you probably would have to have done that in the inheritance process right as he was dying, not 10, 20 years later. So even if the entire Wayne fortune was dirty money, it effectively got, by a legal status, laundered into clean money when it was given over to Bruce Wayne. So, like, you've got a bad news story here that most news people wouldn't want to try and tell, particularly because I imagine the news has sold the Wayne's family as always being the shining, idealized family of Gotham. So now they would have to look like they were lying for decades, telling that story. So they wouldn't want to tell that story. You have an impossible legal case, which nobody would, in the right mind, would try and pursue. Not the mayor, not Harvey Dent, not Lieutenant Gordon. So there's just a huge amount of contrivance here that makes really no sense at all. Let's see, next time.
When your parents died, they left me as caretaker of their estate, their son, and their secrets. I would never betray them.
I think he probably betrayed them in the bit by simply just doing a bad job of raising Bruce Wayne. He was not raised
Your parents were
well.
good people, Bruce. No matter what that thug Falcone told you. Then swear to me there's no truth to it.
The evidence you brought me on Falcone held up. Maybe I misjudged you.
Now Batman's beating up mobsters too. Wonder who he's after next.
Hell of a view.
Bruce, the Wayne name is toxic. I have to do what's best for my campaign. What's best for Gotham. I have to distance myself.
I will.
See, now it would be very weird for Batman to make out with Catwoman if he's dating
along with anyone who
Two-Face. This would be a weird way to create Two-Face, certainly, to cheat on his girlfriend with him. It's an interesting twist, frankly, and it should happen once, at least in the Batman story, where Bruce Wayne or Batman, to keep up his appearance, or just because he romantically actually is interested in somebody, somehow pisses off another rich person. Frankly, it would make a lot of sense if several of Batman's rogues gallery were rich people who just wanted to play villain, instead of them all being basically insane, obsessive people that mirror Batman and Bruce Wayne's insane obsession. And here's a great example of why comic books in general, particularly Marvel and DC, are just failing. Like, they are telling you to read DC Universe Rebirth, which is, I assume, a reboot of the DC universe yet again, which DC does that quite a bit, where Marvel manages to really only have a few crises or infinite crises where things sort of get rebooted. And even in that, I would say DC also has several more instances of alternate multiverse books compared to Marvel, who doesn't really do that many what if books. DC Universe Rebirth is not even something I recognize. It may have been the reboot right after the New 52, which the New 52 barely went a couple years until they once again wanted to reboot it. And in fact, it is just becoming like exponentially faster by the point that they have to reboot the DC universe, because the only stories they really want to tell for Batman in particular is that first year, that origin story. They don't want to get mired in long-running like canonical canon, and they don't want to sell to comic book fans, which are just constantly getting tired of the reboots, but just getting tired of the same old as far as comic books, so that they're falling off. There is a very loyal core base of comic book fans that have propped up and maintained comic books for decades, but that core base is just getting eroded and eroded and eroded, and they are constantly trying to, in the comic book world, get new comic book readers. And you can't get new comic book readers if you're selling Batman issue 666 or higher, which is, I think we're somewhere probably around the Detective Comics issues, somewhere 700 or 800. It's just not really reasonable to do that. So it makes a lot more sense to reboot and have Volume 1 I Am Gotham here, which is a book I've never even heard about. But then they run into this other problem where it says wherever comics and books are sold. Okay, where are books sold in 2021 as of this recording? Amazon.com. Maybe you can find a used bookstore in your city. Maybe you can find a couple. Maybe you can find a new bookstore in your city. If you find a used or new bookstore, used bookstores are going to have old comics, but probably not new ones. A new bookstore very possibly is barely going to have a small shelf of comics. They definitely are not going to have the theoretical 52 volumes that are released within a month by DC. The only place you could really get almost everything from Marvel and DC is if there's a comic book shop. As of this recording, particularly because of a pandemic that's happening in the real world, comic book shops are probably dead. They've been dying for years. So, there's really no opportunity to buy them. And the thing that they're not saying here is they're not saying go to like something like Comixology or dc.com/where to buy. Like, even if they didn't want to directly compete, it would be very easy to have a link here that says go to dc.com/where to buy. And then that could be a web page that is just constantly updated. It could look for your zip code, tell you what the local comic book stores are. It could take you to a online service. It's kind of a shame that even with the online services that exist, as far as Comixology, those are typically the ones that have Marvel and DC don't really have any independent, don't try to get any manga or any manhwa, Korean comics, or anything outside of the main two publishers. And stupidly, they're not great services. Like, they're kind of expensive. They don't offer everything. Like, there's a huge back catalog that if you were just effectively the Netflix / Disney Plus of DC, would make a lot of sense. So much so, it would make a lot of sense nowadays to have a actual Netflix-like app happening. They've not really succeeded to turn old comic books using some kind of deep learning AI algorithm into motion comics. So there are a few motion comics out there, but they had to be handmade, whereas all comics ideally would have been turned to motion comics. But even if you just had still comics, the idea of, as an option, having a comicsology style app on your TV right next to Netflix on your smart TV, and you just click on it and it either can go forward in a few seconds and it plays some nice music in the background, just like Batman theme when you're reading a Batman comic, that would get a lot of people. Certainly also you could have a phone app, and that would make a lot of sense too. But they've really failed to meet new customers where they would be found. Certainly. In a lot of ways, you could have done this decades ago too. That same concept probably would have worked if you syndicated over like the broadcast channels, either ABC, CBS, Fox, or NBC. If you syndicated a show that just showed old comics, just one page for a minute, and played some music in the background, that wouldn't be a primetime show by any means. It probably wouldn't work for a Saturday morning cartoon by any means, but you could definitely have made it a paid pay-per-view type footage that airs somewhere around midnight or 1 or 2 in the morning, and you could then have it be a pay-per-view that straight up is just selling comic books. And frankly, if you made it a pay-per-view, you would pretty much only show a few volumes and get people hooked, and you wouldn't tell a full story. Now, they did a better version of that, certainly with Batman cartoons, when they make Batman cartoons, but you could have definitely done both. Ironically, comic books have been in business for a very long time, and they have never figured out how to actually sell themselves well. If anything, they've done a terrible job and gotten a terrible reputation of being either full of reboots and never really mattering, just being really stupid because the writers are not that good and they're underpaid, or being ugly because the artists are rushed and or underpaid. They've gotten controversy after controversy and tried to go deep into controversies, whereas arguably they could have gone the Coca-Cola route, where there was very few controversies around Coca-Cola, and it's maintained its ability to just consistently sell as a product and barely have to advertise. But yeah, the death of the comic book industry, particularly for Marvel and DC, is obviously their own fault for just not knowing how to do business at all. And this is yet another great example of that. So looks like the next episode, Children of Arkham, is going to be mostly flashbacks, and we can already, you're forced to see the thumbnails for episode 3. Although maybe they've done a decent job here where the thumbnails don't really matter. Like, arguably here, even it says more from DC and Telltale, the Telltale game has done a better job of advertising its own products, because at least there's a link here to Telltale Games website, which would now be owned by a completely different company, and The Wolf Among Us, which is only really a DC property in the sense that they acquired I think it was Image Comics, which was originally an independent label, I believe. And I think it is probably worth also pointing out that a lot of the independent comics creators also did not know how to do business, and eventually left only to be not successful enough to stay independent, and instead ended up getting acquired again. So we don't have any new characters, but does look like the codex is expanding somewhat. Although it kind of doesn't feel like anything that's been added here was added anytime recently, and feels like I would have already have read all of this. In a lot of ways, I guess they probably have bait and switched you a bit here. Barely showing you Catwoman and Harvey Dent and the Penguin. And Falcone was like the only one that we've really taken down, and yeah. I suspect we're not actually going to take down Two-Face / Harvey Dent or Catwoman, and we'll probably only take down the Penguin. And like most Telltale games, I imagine the only choice that you made here that will carry over is the most important one of these 5 choices, which highlights the problem with Telltale games too, is that it pretends like it gives you a lot of choices, and in this case it didn't even really pretend like it was giving you a lot of choices, but then none of it really matters by the time you're in the next episode. That first choice clearly is not going to matter. The second choice isn't going to matter. I think we'll probably see the guy who we could have broken the arm come back, and he may or may not have a broken arm, and that's it. But that probably will happen in episode 2 and not matter by the time you get to episode 3. I wouldn't be surprised if giving the data to Vicky Vale wouldn't really have mattered either. So the only thing that I imagine really would have mattered is if we had killed Falcone, or tried to kill Falcone. I bet he wouldn't have actually been killed even. Alright, well, that's another episode of this series for me. It's taking forever. Like, we are 1/5 of the way done, and I'm still having major problems just maintaining momentum and wanting to play this game. I'm very glad there's really only maybe 3 Telltale games to cover that I have left to cover, because it is getting very dull, and I'm ready to move on to a different genre I probably would never choose to actually try and cover every single game from a company again unless they only made a couple of games, because this Telltale style, which at one point was being praised as being innovative, has really failed to affect the video game industry so much. And it's not even like the idea of dialogue choices are exclusive or even were exclusive to Telltale when The Walking Dead came out. They existed before. If anything, the Telltale style is an attempt at creating a very low effort tier game as far as the interaction and the gameplay programming, while trying to make a very high effort tier game as far as the visuals and the licenses. Otherwise, this would just be a visual novel with some QuickTime events. That's really all Telltale games boil down to, is that they're very, very pretty visual novels with QuickTime events. And I would prefer to lean back to actual puzzles and point-and-click adventure concepts. When you compare this to something like Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, there's way more gameplay in that very old game than here. Frankly, there might be more dialogue and branching paths in Fate of Atlantis compared to this game, which that's a sad thought considering how old Fate of Atlantis is. Anyways, that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to further follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.